In this video, we're going to learn how to build an invoice in PDF using the QuestPDF library. So basically, at the end of this video, we're going to have the following. We're going to have a PDF like this, where we have a logo, data here at the left, more data here at the right, and then we're going to have a table that will have some line items. In the end, we're going to have a grand total here, which is the sum of all of this data. And finally, we're also going to put a footer in our invoice. So let's get started. Alright, so the first thing that we want to do is to download the companion app. This is an app that will allow us to visualize the PDF that we generate from our application. We don't have to use it. We could just simply download the PDF and open it using an Adobe product, but in our case, we're just going to use it. So you can come here to questpdf.com/companion/download and then download the version that corresponds to your operating system. In my case, I will use Windows, but if you have macOS or Linux, you can use those. So after you download it, you install it and then open it. In my case, I already did that, so let's see that indeed I have the QuestPDF companion app open here. So I will leave that open here, and now let's come to Visual Studio. In my case, I will use a console application. This is a brand new console application, so I haven't made any changes to it. Now, if you want to use QuestPDF with Blazor, Spin.NET Core in general, or whatever, you can use it. I'm just using a console application so that this tutorial is a little bit quicker. So first, I want to install the QuestPDF package, so Manage NuGet Packages. Let's come to Browse, QuestPDF. Let me click on here and install, accept. Alright, so now we need some helper classes that will have, for example, the model of an invoice, and also I need a invoice factory so that we can get some data. Now, we're going to use test data, so we're going to do things in memory. In real life, the data of the invoice would come from a database. But again, to keep things simple, we're going to do things in memory. So right click on here, let me create those helper classes. So class, first I will start with the models. So models, I will just copy and paste this part because this is just me creating some classes. So, alright, so here we have these models. We have an invoice class. It has an ID, a task receipt, expiration sequence, which is just a date time, a company, the date of the company, emission date for the invoice, the client name, invoice items, which is an enumerable. These are the products that the client acquired, and also a total, which is just the sum of the totals of the invoice items. Then we have a company, which has a logo, a address, and RNC, which is basically its ID. And finally, we have invoice item, which has a name. This is like a product, like a name, a price, quantity, and total, which is the product of multiplying price and quantity. Again, simple stuff here. Now let's create a repository. Right click here, add class, invoice repository, and again this is basically a helper class, so I will just paste this. Alright, so here we have this. I have a random class here because we need some random data. I have this method public that returns an invoice, get invoice. We have the company data here, an address, a logo, which is a simple image. In my case, this is just FG of Felipe Gavilan. You can use whatever logo you have. And the RNC, which is the ID of a company. Then invoice items, we're generating 30 invoice items. We're using a name placeholders label. This placeholders label is a helper method from QuestPDF that allows us to generate a random name, which is pretty cool. Then quantity, and we're generating a random number between 1 and 10, and also the same goes for the price. Alright, and then we have an invoice. Here we're generating a random ID. That task receipt is just hard-coded. Expiration sequence, also hard-coded. The client name is myself. The company data, invoice items, and emission date is today. And then we return the invoice. Alright, so now let's come to the program class, because this is where we're going to generate and use our PDF. So first we need to configure QuestPDF, indicating the license that corresponds to us. In our case, we're going to use the community license, which allows us to use it for free because we are not a big company that generates over $1 million a year. So let me do the following. Let me say here QuestPDF settings license, QuestPDF infrastructure license type, community. Alright. Now let me instantiate my repository. So invoice repository equal to new invoice repository. var invoice, invoice repository dot get invoice. And then what we're going to do next is that we're going to inject this invoice into a document. When we talk about documents in QuestPDF, we're talking about what we're going to use to generate a PDF. So let's create a class that will contain the logic for building our PDF. So let's come here, right click here, add class. I'll call it invoice document. We're going to implement the iDocument interface. So iDocument control dot, because I want to implement this interface, and in this compose method we can compose our PDF. So we're going to build a PDF that will have three parts: the header, the content, and the footer. The header goes in every page and will contain the company logo, the company data, the client name, and so on. The content is going to have the table that will have all of the invoice items and a total. And finally, the footer will contain simply how many pages are there in the document. So what we're going to do then is that we're going to say container page. We're going to configure the page, and I want to add some margin. So margin 50, so that it looks professional, semicolon here. And now we're going to create three methods. One for creating the header, another for creating the content, and another for the footer. This is great because it allows us to have our class organized in methods that have a single responsibility. So let me say here, page, header, let's start with the header, element, and let me say compose header. Alright, now let me create this compose header method here. So let me say private void compose header iContainer container. Alright, so let's get to work. We're going to build a header that will have two columns. At the left, we're going to have the company logo and its data, and at the right, we're going to have invoice data. So let me say here, container, first we need a row, so row, and let me say here, row, semicolon. Then let me make here a row relative item, which means that the size of the item is going to depend on the content, and we're going to define here a column. So column here, semicolon, this is the first column. And now what I want to do here is a simple hello world so that we can see that everything is working correctly. So let me say here, column, item, text, hello world, semicolon here. Alright, so now let me use this document that we have here in the program class. So var document equal to new invoice document. And let me say document. We can generate our PDF. We're going to generate our PDF. We can generate it in different ways. For example, I can just generate it in memory and use it. Or I can, for example, download it to my PC. As we said before, we're going to use the companion app. So let me say here, show in companion. Alright. So now let me press Ctrl F5. Remember that we already opened the companion QuestPDF app. So let me just come here. Now I have to wait a few seconds. And we're going to get a PDF displayed to us. And as you can see, indeed, we have Hello World here. And something that I love about this companion app is that it allows us to examine our PDF. For example, here as you can see, we have header. And as you can see, header gets focus in the PDF so that we can explore the content of the header, but also of the content and then of the footer. So as you can see, we can traverse through all of the elements of our PDF, which is actually very, very useful when you're dealing with complex PDF. So now that this hello world works, let's come back here and let's continue. Now, of course, I need to be able to inject my invoice into this invoice document. So I need to come here and let me put here a constructor. So let me say here invoice, control dot, and I will assign it as a property. Alright, here it is. So now let's come here and let's get to work. I will delete this. This was just an example. Now I need to put the logo of the company. So we're going to use an image. So let me say here, column, item, height. It will be of 2 centimeters. I can use feet, inches, meters, this unit, millimeters, and point. In my case, I will use centimeter. So 2 centimeters of height, image, and then I will use invoice, because I just injected the invoice to my class, company, logo, semicolon here. Now let me say here var scale, because this is a value that I will reuse several times in this section. So 0.8, this will be for the size of the font or font size. So let me say here column, item, scale, text, and here I will put the address of the company. So let me say here invoice company address. Alright. Now I will put the RNC or ID of the company. At least in my home country, RNC is the official ID of a company. Not sure how it is in other countries, but that is fine. So let me say here text, and let me use a string interpolation. I will say RNC, and in here I will say invoice company RNC. Alright. Now I want an empty line, so column, item, text, empty line. Then the emission date, so column, item, scale, text, date. And I will say here, I just wanted to say this actually, invoice emission date dot to string, and we can use whatever format we want. In my home country we use this one. I know that in the US folks use first the month, so we can actually do that. Let me put here the month first, dd, and then y. Alright, semicolon here. Another empty line, and then the client's name. So item, scale, text, and let me say here client name, and let me say here invoice client name, and I will use a to oper here. Alright, semicolon, and let's see how we're doing. So I will just close the console, Control F5 to open it again, and then have our PDF display here again. Alright, so as you can see we have the logo and the data of the company. Now here at the right I want to put the data of the invoice. So I want to create another column. So outside of this column that I have here, but inside of this row, I want to create yet another column. So row, relative item, one more time. I want to put a border of 1 unit and define a column. So column here, semicolon here. I will define some padding. So padding 5. So let me say here, this will be like a title for this section. Item, border bottom of 1, padding. You know that the padding is basically the distance between the border and the content. So padding, text, electronic consumption bill, and semi-bold. Let's see what we got. I just want you to see what we're doing. Control F5, one more time. I just closed the console. So now let's see that we're going to have basically a box that will contain the data of our invoice or our bill. So here we're going to have the ID, the tax receipt, and the expiration sequence. So let's come back here. Again, that is all data that bills or invoices contain in my country. Again, what we're going to put here is simply text, so I will just copy and paste it and walk you through it. Alright, so as you can see, we have the invoice number, and we're using the padding, of course. We have the tax receipt, and then tax receipt, expiration sequence, and expiration sequence. Alright, so let's continue working. The next part is to build the table. The table is going to contain the line items of our invoice. So let's go there. Remember that this section will be in the content. This was the header. Now let's go for the content. So page, content, element, and we use element to basically indicate that we're going to have the composing of our element in another method. So compose content. Again, let me copy this. I will collapse this because I finished with the header. So let's come here and let me say private void compose content I container. Alright, so let me say here container. We're going to use some padding, some vertical padding of 40 so that there is some space in between the header and the content. Column. This will be a single column. And now we're going to build our table. Since the table is a little bit big in terms of code, we're going to put it in its own method. So column dot item dot element compose table. Alright, so now again we're going to come here and say private void compose table I container. And notice how this API is so consistent. Notice that always when we use, for example, element, we have to create a method that's going to be void and it's going to receive an iContainer. I like that very much about QuestPDF. Now let's say here container, table, table. Now in QuestPDF, we divide the building of a table in 3 steps. The first step is to define how many columns we're going to have. Then we define the headers for the table and then the content of the table. That is the data that we're going to display to the user. So I will do the following. I will say step 1, defining the columns. Then step 2 and step 3. So 2 here and 3 here. And let me say here, I want to say in step 2, defining the header, or headers, should I say, and defining the data or content. Content. All right. So now let's come here and let's say table, columns definition, columns, and basically we're going to have 4 columns: name, quantity, price, and total. So let me say here, columns, relative column, and then that 4 times. Now, the name of a product typically is bigger than, for example, the quantity. And by bigger, I mean how many space it occupies horizontally. So what we're going to do is that we're going to say 2 here so that this gets more space in the table because this is the name. Alright, so now after that, we're going to define the headers. So let me say here, table, header, header, semicolon. And now something very cool about QuestPDF is that we can define a method that will contain the common styling of elements. For example, let's come here and I will use a local method. I'll say static iContainer. We're going to use our beloved iContainer. Cell styling iContainer container. And then in here I will say return and I will take the container and I will apply the styling to it. So I will say default text style and I will say here that is going to be semi-bold. We're going to do some vertical padding of 5. Also, we're going to put some border at the bottom of 1. And finally, the border color is going to be black. So colors, and these colors comes from QuestPDF helpers black. We're going to use black here. Alright, semicolon here. And then I can reuse this styling. For example, let me say header, cell, element, cell styling, and then text description. Alright, now I want to repeat this once for the second header, and I will say here, since this is a number because it's the quantity, we're going to say align right, and then the text is going to be quantity, quantity. Alright, and now let me repeat this twice so that we have here the price and the total. And notice how we have a base styling here defined, and then I can add some extra styling for some particular columns like quantity, price, and total. And let me say here total in uppercase. Alright, so now finally let's come for the data. So I will use a for each here. Let me use a for each. So for each bar item in invoice line item. So invoice items. Alright, and here I will say table, cell, element, and just like we did here, we're going to have some default styling. So let me comment this out just for a moment, and let me say here static iContainer cell styling iContainer container. Alright, so now let me say here return container, and let's apply some styling. Border bottom of 1, border color, it will be gray, so colors, gray, and it will be lighten 2. And finally some vertical padding, so padding vertical of 5. Alright, so now I can uncomment this out and apply this default styling, and then text and the name of the product. So item, name. Alright, now let me copy and paste this, and I need to do some align right here because it's a number, this is the quantity. Let me invoke this. So item, quantity, and to a string. Alright, so now let me repeat this twice because again we want to use this alignment, but in here I will actually do the following. I will use this string interpolation, and then I will say item. I wanted to say item like this, price, and then colon n, so that we have a nicely formatted number. And then I want to do the same here. So let me say this and this, item total n. Alright, and with this we have the table. Let's see that. Let me close the console. Let me press Ctrl F5 to run our application. Let's come back to the companion app. And let's see that indeed below the header we have our table, description, quantity, price, and total. And we have each item here. And then since we have too many products, then QuestPDF is smart enough to understand that it needs to create another page. And then we have page 2. And we have repeated here the header. And then we have the remaining products here. Now, something that I want to add is a total here. So let's do that. Let's come here. And now let's come up here. Remember that we were in compose table, which is part of compose content. So below this compose table that we have here, I want to add a total. So column.item, align right. I want it at the right, text, and we can write here grand total. And then in here, I will say invoice total. All right. Now let's see what we got. Let me close the console. And when I say the console, I mean this console, by the way. Ctrl F5. Let's come back to the companion app. And let's see that indeed here we have this grand total. Now, it's too close to the table, so we can add some spacing. So let's come back here. And let me say here, column, spacing 5. All right. Now, finally, we want to build the footer. So again, let's come back to our compose method. Below the content, I can say page footer, and then element, compose footer, semicolon. Let me copy the name. Let me collapse this, and let's come here, and let me say private void compose footer, container. All right, excellent. And now let's come here. And let me say container, align center. I want it at the center, text. And here I will say the following. I will say here the current page, so current page number, then a constant text, span, this, slash, and then the total page number, so total pages. So we will have, for example, page 1 of 2, page 2 of 2, and so on. And that's actually it. With this, we're good to go. Ctrl F5. And let's see our invoice finally is here. So let's see that indeed we have our invoice. So we have the header, we have the content, and we have the footer. As you can see here, 1 of 2. And then in here, 2 of 2. And as I mentioned before, notice that here we can explore all of the properties of our PDF, which is great when we want to debug because something doesn't look good. And then we know what is breaking our PDF. So again, this is a very cool tool that we can use to build PDF. Follow me for more content like this. Thank you.